Hello and welcome to the Mojo podcast with me, Richard Stokes. It's impossible to publish anything right now without reference to the global pandemic that is the coronavirus, COVID-19. Simply put, wherever you're listening to this podcast, it will be affecting you, directly or indirectly, so please stay safe and well and follow good advice. And with the spectre of a global health crisis hanging over us, I've realised very personally the impact of health on my own mojo. I've been pretty under the weather for the last 2 weeks. Not flu or anything like corona, thankfully, but something that's really knocked me sideways. Now, I'm sure I knew this for myself, but it has taken this period of illness for me to totally understand how health is foundational to mojo. Yes, this is a really obvious thing to say, but when you're fit and healthy, it's not something you're really thinking about, is it? And it's interesting, my guest today references health in his hierarchy of needs when it comes to his own mojo. I'm feeling much better now, thankfully, and I can feel my mojo restoring on a daily basis. So I hope that your health also remains strong too, and I think the message for all of us here is not to take our health for granted. To this week's episode then, and it's all about kindness, what that looks like in the workplace and how it can be a business superpower. And not just in one area, but many. My guest today is prolific in his work and brings tremendous energy and vigour to the show, hence the importance of health to his mojo. Daniele Fiandaca is the co-founder of Utopia, the business change consultancy, co-founder of Token Man, an initiative to give men in industry a better understanding of the challenges women face in business, co-founder of Creative Social and co-author of the book Creative Superpowers. He also organises and curates the brilliant annual conference called Masculinity in the Workplace, and this is where we first met. I was struck as a delegate at this conference last year of Daniele's mission, but also his courage to display emotion and to be vulnerable, not something you always see from a man in industry. We talk about a lot of subjects: kindness, inclusion, purpose, making impact, being in the right place at the right time, influence, idea, Darwinism, hacking for productivity. The list goes on. We covered a lot in our fantastic conversation. The other important contextual reference for this week's episode is that we recorded the week that British TV personality Caroline Flack took her own life after being hounded and vilified by the tabloid press and on social media. So being kind, which is always important, just seems even more vital right now. As Caroline said in one of her last Instagram posts, in a world where you can be anything, be kind. And that just seems like great guidance for us all right now. So welcome back to the Mojo podcast. My guest today is Daniele Fiandaca.
Yep.
Have I pronounced that right?
Fiandaca. That's good.
I did ask you just before
as
well.
Did. That's fine.
But again, I just want to get it right. Fiandaca. Daniele, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
We're back in Soho in a lovely podcast studio. And so Daniele, I always start with this question. How is your mojo?
My mojo is fantastic. It mostly is. I'd give it an 8 out of 10.
Okay,
today.
great.
Yeah. I'm feeling good.
And is there it's a very British thing, I think, not to go for the full 10 out of 10. But is there any reason why it's a little bit lower today?
I mean, full 10 has to be. I mean, for a start, it's half term this week, so I don't think there's any half term when I've ever been 10. Simply because I think partly of your mojo needs energy. I mean, you can't. At the moment, this week's always a frustrating week. It's like summer, it's like Easter, because your clients aren't around. And I think you need to be part of feeding your mojo is to have that that ability to sell stuff, to move stuff forward. To be I need to be active, and it's just quieter this week. So I haven't got probably the framework to give myself that 10 out of 10. And 10 out of 10 is being on fire, and it's very hard to be on fire when you don't have clients around.
Got it. So it's the context of where we are rather than
100%.
Exactly what's going on. And so you talked a little bit, you gave a few clues there for what mojo means for you. Can you talk a little bit more about that fire, that energy you're talking about?
Well, I think it's your mojo is your ability to be your best self, to actually, but use it to create change. Yeah, to make something happen, and to see a difference. So really it's that ability to perform at your peak in a way which you will see adding value. I mean, that for me is mojo. That's when you just know you've got it and you're just feeling good and you're positive and things are moving forward.
I love that sense that it's not just an inner thing, but you are actually seeing the effect of your
you
mojo
have
in
to
terms
see
of the impact.
it can't all be about, for me you have to see that impact. I think I could never have a high mojo sitting in a room myself, doesn't matter what I was doing. So even though I've co-authored, co-edited 3 books, I would never say that process has ever had me at my maximum mojo. That isn't what stimulates me. What stimulates me would be probably the first event you do off the back of the book, full of people and, getting that energy. So I'm one of those people that really hopefully gives positive energy, but also feeds off positive energy. Right. And I kind of need all of those things to get your mojo. And I think I was thinking about you asking the question, for me, I think mojo has this kind of hierarchy of needs. I think you kind of need, I think you need to have, so I've got this thing called the wealth equation, which is basically wealth equals positive happiness. And within that wealth equation, I kind of define it as health plus purpose plus family. And I think the thing for me is on that wealth thing, it doesn't have money in it, but within it, it does have financial health, it has mental health, and it has physical health. For me, my hierarchy of needs is I kind of need to have that financial health, mental health, and physical health to give me a chance to actually be my best self. And that's the kind of hierarchy of needs. And again, with family, I find that, and family includes friends, where I think it's harder to be your best self is when you do have stress at home. Yeah, and actually those things are negative. But if you've got a really supportive system around you, that just gives you that platform. And I think fundamentally, it's nearly impossible to have a positive mojo and if you're doing something you don't love. Yeah, and that's kind of the baseline. And I think you then start going, okay, fine, I've got that baseline, which I do have most of the time, to be fair. And then you kind of go, okay, so what am I doing? What are we very clear on what we're trying to achieve? That clarity of what we're trying to achieve, and then really getting that momentum. And that's when you can really be at your peak, when you know that you're seeing, you're creating change either for the business, for the clients that you're working with, for anything that you're doing. Actually, for the token man work I do around gender equality, all of those things. As long as you've got that baseline, it's then going, okay, how am I progressing within that?
So how you got the base, and then it's adding on and adding
totally.
on and adding on.
And if your base is not solid, it impacts everything. Yeah. So, I had various things at home I had to do last year that impacted my ability to be my best self at work.
Right.
Yeah, and that's really important to understand that.
Yeah. So it sounds to me you've got a very clear sense of kind of where your levels are, and okay, I need to address something.
Yeah, I went for a run this morning for an hour. That's. I really feel if I'm not, I run a lot, but if I'm not feeling 100% physically, it really impacts how I'm feeling. I was ill toward the end of last year, just with flu for a week, 2 weeks, but it really threw me off. And I think, and so for me, I know the things that really impact me detrimentally.
We kind of set up this conversation, this idea of prolific kindness, and this was a sense that came to me after we met for a coffee, and you talked me through all the things you do, and I kind of sat there after you left. I was like, my word, he does a lot of stuff, as you've just slightly talked to there, and we're going to go through loads of this in a second. I thought, I love this sense of it being so prolific, this sort of multi-hyphenate impact you talk a lot about there. You need to see that impact, but it's not just the prolific piece. It's that it was linked to this kindness that I got a very clear sense that you care, that what you do is super meaningful. You talked a bit about Token Man in there, and we'll talk about that as well. So that really kind of got me thinking, and we will go through, I think, that as a bit of a theme as we go through. But to get a sense of maybe where that's come from for you, should we just step back a little bit and look at when you were the CEO of a digital agency called Profero?
Yep.
And what you kind of learned from that and what kind of happened subsequently.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I ran an agency with, at the time, 2 of my best friends. So, for us, we ran it for 10 years. We were very lucky. We were pioneers at the time. We still believe we were the first dedicated internet marketing agency in the world. And that's quite an interesting place to be in. And for 9 years, it was amazing, really amazing. And that was partly because we were very clear on what we were doing. Growth was happening. You know, we were there. We were definitely not only pioneers, but we delivered brilliant products for our clients. And then politics started happening, and the truth is, with one of who was my best friend, I think there was a gap in terms of the vision. I think the gaps kind of started coming in terms of starting to realise that maybe our values didn't align. And at the same time, I took on a new role, so I became the CEO of Europe. And although I'd kind of, as the global COO, I'd kind of been responsible for some of the offices already, so it wasn't a massive leap. I was already responsible for Italy, I was already responsible for Spain, and fun enough, I was already responsible for Sydney, but it was just a completely different role, and it was a role that I wasn't suited to me. And actually just all the circumstances that were happening around it and the stress that was happening at that point in time in the business just meant I wasn't my best self. Yeah, and I went from having a job which I absolutely loved to a job I hated. I mean, it was, really, I think when I left, by the time I left, the amount of people that just came up to me, within a month, 2 months, and just said, wow, you're a completely different person than you were when I met you a year ago. And I think we do a lot of work around mental health and stress in the workplace. I think that I had no idea that, the impact that, 10 years of relentlessness. I mean, it was relentless. 10 years of being dedicated to that business, and that's being everything that I did. But also, the minute that dedication and the time and the effort I put in became something that I just didn't enjoy, just the negative impact that had on my body, on how I was as a person, and the best thing I did was leave. And however hard it was, it just became I realised how easy it was for me to lose my mojo if I didn't truly believe in what we were doing.
So going back to your point about purpose. So
purpose is fundamental. You really have to believe in it, and it always has to. And let's be really clear. The agency did very well after I left. It was a great agency, and my better half Tina, she was there for 5 years. It's not like it changed overnight. It just wasn't. It just was. I was no longer the person that could best fit in that role. So it was a mutual thing. It just took us a year to work that out. And so for me, at that, looking back, it was the right time for me to go. But in that meantime, there were other things that meant I keep on talking about. One of them was my best friend. I haven't spoken to one of them who was my best friend since I left. So there was a lot of negativity around that me leaving. But in the end, it turned out really well.
Yeah. So it sounds like a very, as you said, very challenging point of your life, but a huge learning experience.
Huge learning. In terms of I had to work out. Having only had, it seems a bit weird now. I'm trying to work out how old I was, but I was still mid-30s. But for me, it was I'd just come out of a CEO role at mid-30s. I'd been COO for the last 9 years. For me, it was like this big corporate job, and I left without having any idea of what I'd do next. Literally zero idea, and I think I kind of. That need to then start to look at yourself, and I think it was Simon Waterfall I sat down when I was thinking about leaving, and he just said to me, ever since I've known you, I've only known you as Profero. I think you need time out to work out who you are, and I think it was such great advice. It took me quite a long time to then go through that process and understand who I was. And let's be really clear. Again. I talk about this a lot about privilege. I was in a privileged position. So I could take 4 to 6 months off and kind of fall into something, which is exactly what happened. I fell into something that I had no idea where I was going to go. But, life took me in a direction that has taken me to today, really.
Right. So from that moment, at low mojo ebb, I guess you were in at that point, this... almost challenged your identity from what you're saying. You were Mr. Profero, and then all of a sudden you're not. You've gone from that entitled position, CEO, COO, to nothing.
Yep, that's exactly it. And it is,
How did you respond?
Well, I think partly I I was lucky because I was, at the time, I was running Creative Social. So I still had an identity. I still had something that I was attached to. So therefore, I still had influence to a certain extent. I think influence is really interesting because, you really notice when you lose influence. And sometimes influence just comes from the role you have or the title you have. And then all of a sudden you lose that influence. It becomes really hard. It does become really hard. And I think that does impact how confident you are. I think I was just very lucky because I spent some time, and again, come back to that. I think I did decide that I was going to do something good while I had that time off. And one of those things I decided to do was I decided to go to Hyper Island and teach the students, which I did in my own time. I invested in it. I think they paid for the flights, but I went over there and I developed a whole new workshop. And so for me, it was a great learning. I think it was a real win-win. But what's interesting for me is it was only 2 months later, because of that experience, they'd invited me to speak, to go to Sweden and help them with their curriculum. And said, would love you to come over here. And I kind of went, yes, I would. I was in holiday with my best friends. And then the Icelandic volcano erupted. I'm going to try and say it because I've been trying to practice. Yes, but Eyjafjallajökull was the volcano, and it erupted. And I couldn't get back to this thing in Sweden. So I phoned up the contact in Sweden. I literally just said, I can't make it. I'm stuck in San Francisco. We happen to be stuck in this really horrible hotel in San Francisco. And as he put the phone down, one of the founders, Mika, I think it was Mika, walked past him swearing. And he's like, what? And he went, what's wrong? And he said, well, I can't get to Los Angeles for the masterclass that we're running in Los Angeles. And he said, well, I know someone in San Francisco that I think could do this job. And he went, okay, contact him. So I got this call almost immediately saying, can you go to LA? We'll pay for you to hire a car to fly to LA. We're going to put you in, I think I looked up at TripAdvisor. It was the top 5th highest ranked. It was the SLS in LA. We'll put you up in the and we'll pay you a fee. I went, that sounds amazing. Yeah, especially when this horrible hotel. But I went, and I'd never done it before, but I haven't got any content. They said, oh, don't worry about that. We'll send you what the decks were before. And all I did, I was lucky. I was the founder of Creative Social. So all the people within Creative Social, I went out to that network and I said, can you help me? This is what I need to cover. And I think 2 people just sent me decks of stuff they did. So I spent like 18 hours building a deck, driving to Los Angeles, and within 2 days I was delivering content. And it was really interesting for me because that really did. And when I say it changed my life, it really did change my life. A number of levels, actually. Firstly, I hated public speaking with a vengeance. But when I say public speaking, I never really done it. But getting up and standing in front of the agency of 100 people, I hated it. Absolutely hated it. And then all of a sudden I was being asked to go in and train 30 people in a room. And I think it was the moment that I started to think, well, actually, I do know some stuff, and everything that I've learned of being on that forefront, actually, I do have views that are interesting and can start helping people. And so it became my confidence came up really quickly because all of a sudden, and I worked, Anders, who was leading it, has become a great friend, but, he was amazing in terms of supporting me within that. And for the next, although I did have my own consultancy as well, 50% of my work was with Hyper Island. And so, Hyper Island, I've done over, I haven't done any recently, but, I ended up doing over 50 masterclasses with Hyper Island and going in and getting people to understand how they need to change their culture in the digital world.
Yeah.
Okay, but, I now run a culture change business. We don't do, although we do a lot of work around entrepreneurial, so understanding the negative impact digital's maybe had on businesses, so email, always on, 24/7, etc., etc. Actually, the methodology we use is I learned from Hyper Island. Yeah, and I never, all those things, if that Icelandic volcano had not erupted, I wouldn't be here today.
And I love that story because you sort of talk about it being luck because no one can predict what's going to happen
totally.
and the call that's going to come, but also that the opportunity came to you, you happened to be in place, okay, maybe that's luck, but you jumped on it, right? You knew, I really want to do this, because you've been working with them a little bit before.
No, I never. I worked with students. I trained students.
Oh, I see.
I never. They weren't a client. They weren't. I was just helping the students. So for me, it really was just. It was just doing things. But again, that little thing, like, go back to that session I did with the students. I use the workshop and a theme where I take these videos and get them to watch videos, and that's probably, if I look at Utopia now, and so that was. How many years ago was that? That must be 10, 15, 12 years ago. If I look at one of the workshops that works best at us Utopia within the inclusion and diversity space, it just is a mirror of that workshop. We've just changed the case studies and the videos. But just showing how you can take stuff that was so long ago and just spending that time to think just adds so much value. Yeah. I mean, it was. Listen, Gary Player said, I think a lot of it is luck, but I do find the harder I work, the luckier I get. Yes. There is an element to that, although I do think we have to be careful with that statement, because, in a world where burnout is at its all-time high, the solution isn't necessarily always to work as hard as you can or work long hours. I think, we talk about it, you look at someone like Einstein, he only worked 4 days. Darwin, but I think Einstein might sit there. But Charles Darwin, he only worked 4 days, 4 hours a day. That's all he did. But yet if you look at his output, it was incredible. Yeah, no one judges Darwin on his presenteeism. No, did you turn up to the office, Charles? Totally. So we do have to be careful of that comment. But I think if you are smart and can align everything, I think it works really well. And I think we're sort of coming slightly more up to date now. But thank you I think it's important just to go through almost the history of it and that moment of when you're sat in the hotel in San Francisco, because it does explain an awful lot, it seems, of what comes later on. And also, for me, there's this sense of, I think a lot of people do kind of worry a little bit about their careers and where they're going and how do I make certain things happen. And you can design for certain things, or you can put yourself in good positions. However, there are always these opportunities that drop, and there were you in the right place for it to drop, and then wanting it to happen and doing the drive and then creating that relationship and all that work, which is where you are now. So, yeah, and I think it's interesting you talk about that multi-hyphen career. I do get asked quite often, how do you choose what, you're doing so many different things, how do you choose what to focus on or spend time on? And so I do believe, ideas are really, ideas are easy. Putting them out there is the harder bit. But once you put ideas out there, you soon start to see which ones gather momentum naturally. So if an idea goes out there and it dies, then it wasn't a good idea. Yeah, so sitting here now, I have a project in the back of my mind that I'd love to do, but at the moment it's just not happening. The timing's not right. But at a certain point, I probably will switch it back on, and I'll probably find within 3 months whether it was the right thing to do or not. And if it wasn't, then you actually mothball it. Yeah. And you go, actually, I tried it, it didn't fit, and it didn't fit within the ecosystem of stuff that we're going to do. And I think we'll start to go through it, but I think where it's become interesting for me, because I did so many things early in my career, is I've now started to realise the value of maybe doing as many things, but making sure they all ladder up to the same output and the same outcome. Right. Yeah? So they're all doing the same thing. So everything I do now has to fit within Utopia and what we're trying to do as a business. If it doesn't, then it becomes a hobby. But then, then I have to question, okay, are there other things I could do as a hobby that actually would be more appropriate to what I'm doing now? Got it. So I love that sense of almost applying Darwinism to your ideas, right? Put them out there. It's exactly what it is. If they survive, right? If they die, there's a reason why it died, and evolution happens. And I think it is a modern way of working. I think it's a future way of working. We will all have more things to do, but you're very clear about it's got to ladder up to the output that you want it to be. Otherwise, it's beyond a side hustle. Maybe it's
it's a hobby?
Well, I think I've got to an age now where side hustle, I know what I want to do. I know my purpose. So therefore, a side hustle should fit with that purpose. So Token Man 100% is integrated into the Utopia business. We support it as our do the right thing strategy. Yeah. But fundamentally, what we're trying to change there is in line with what we're trying to change with work cultures.
So can you unpack it a little bit? So Utopia is your day-to-day business.
Yeah. So I co-founded just under 3 years ago a culture change business with Nadia Powell. Myself and Nadia had worked together previously on 2 projects. So we co-founded Innovation Social together because we were heads of innovation within the advertising world at the same time. And the second thing we did together was the Great British Diversity Experiment. So we'd worked on, which was an amazing project in which we took 180 people just to show why diversity leads to better creative ideas. And it was an amazing experience and an amazing project. And I think, alongside, and it's a culture change business. So we will go in and work with big corporates to help them build more entrepreneurial, more inclusive and more purposeful workplaces. So fundamentally, we're just trying to create better workplaces for everyone.
Coming back to your idea about, your sense of whatever I do, it needs to make a difference. It needs to be important. It needs to fulfill your purpose.
Yeah. And we need to know that whatever we're doing has an impact or is inspiring people to help create better workplaces. And actually, when I say better workplace, if we can get better workplaces for everyone, ideally we'd also start seeing that part of that will be understand the impact businesses can have on society. So, if we can convince every workplace to be more inclusive, then we will, by definition, have a better society. So I think this idea of, especially in a space where politicians will just consistently let us down, I think people have started to recognise that actually the political system is not going to help us. So therefore, how can we help ourselves? And part of that is, there's a real movement to understanding the impact corporates can have on society. If you want to be a company of the future, you need to be delivering that positive impact, because actually people aren't going to come and work with you anymore, because, we're seeing Gen Z coming through looking for something very different. And it's very interesting. We do lots of talk, and Taylor Prince Fraser, he is one of our speakers, and he just talked about it in a way that I'd never really heard before. And he just talked about his generation. He said, our generation is no different to your generation. It's not all of a sudden that we've got a conscience that you never had. You just never had the access to the information we had.
Right.
Yeah, and with information comes responsibility. And so therefore, as a generation, we have a responsibility you never had, because we know the impact climate is having on our planet and what it will mean to us. You never had that. Growing up, I still remember, as a young boy, I had the Encyclopedia Britannica. There was nothing in there. But now, when you think about news and, the access and the information, he just said we just have a responsibility that you never had, and we take that responsibility very seriously.
And do you think is that sense of responsibility, that burden, weighing very heavily on this generation? Because you talked about burnout earlier. Is there a link in there?
I think there's a number of things. Unfortunately we've seen very recently the impact social media can have negatively. So I think there's this idea of living in the open the whole time and having to conform to this media stereotype, I think can be really damaging. So I think there is partly that aspect. I think there's a number of other aspects, and again, if we look at the workplace itself, just having technology in the 24/7 is having a huge impact on people. As more people are starting to wake up to the positive value of having a more diverse workforce, pulling those people into a place that isn't inclusive, in which they feel like they're the out-group every day, and have to, deal with some of the microaggressions on a daily basis just because of who they are, that can also have a really detrimental impact. So we're seeing a number of things, and I think as as we get to talk about mental health far more, there is a short-term impact of mental health. Things will become harder in the short term because you do have to have very difficult conversations, which opens people up. In the short term, opens people up, but in the long term, if you get it right, it's going to be very positive. That ability for us to speak, and it's so important that people are allowed to speak and speak about some of the mental health challenges they have.
And is this what you're helping businesses be better at? Are you helping them be kinder, to sort of go to that second part?
Kindness is really interesting because kindness, I think, fits within so many parts of it. There's no doubt that kindness on the mental health really does help. But, and it's a simple thing like, and a kindness is really something that I think has come onto our remit in the last, really thinking about the last 20 years. I think the first time I really spotted it, to be honest, the time it really hit me was about 18 months ago. So we also do a lot of work around neurodiversity, so understanding the value that people who are neurodivergent, so people who are ADHD or have autism or are dyslexic or dyscalculia or Tourette's, the value they can bring to organisations just because of their brains being wired differently. And quite early in that process, I got to survey, and it was a very small sample size. It was 8 people. To really it was a little project we were doing. And the one question on it was, for someone like me, who's neurotypical, what advice would you give me? Yeah, how can I be a better ally to you? Yeah, and all 8 said exactly the same thing, which was be kind. All 8 of them. And what they were fundamentally saying was, do you know what? We do, because our brains work very differently to you, the way that we operate sometimes won't feel the same as the way you operate. And so therefore we may have reactions, we may need more time, we may think. And just by being kind and having that kindness, then all of a sudden you can actually go, okay, what can I do to help you? And I think the example that I got was what does the lens of kindness look like? So we run an ambassador program for Coca-Cola European partners, working alongside them. And I'll never forget, and it's specifically around its inclusion ambassadors. I'll never forget, we trained, there's now 120 of them, but we initially trained 80 of them, really to understand what exclusion looks like, to understand how they can be more inclusive, how they can be better allies, how they can be change makers. And then 6 months later, we got together and we said, okay, tell us some of the stories, some of the things that happened. And this first story I heard really surprised me, because what she told a story about was someone that looks like me coming to work and just being nasty, rude, and rather than rally against that and go and call that person, she just thought, I wonder what's happening in his life to be able to be and that for me is the fundamental root of kindness, is actually saying, what is it that's happening to make him feel like that? And so that was for me, that was the epitome. We'd already gone to the level of allyship, because this was a woman who was looking at a man and going, okay, how can I support that man, a white man in that particular case, someone that's always been in the in-group and had it very easy, but yet she recognised that actually allyship and true inclusion does mean supporting everyone, and actually her kindness allowed her to go, okay, what's happening? Can I go over and speak and just say, how are you? How are things? Is there anything I can do? And I thought that was wonderful.
How you're working with a number of companies, but you clearly want to make this the biggest impact possible.
Yes.
How can more companies understand or get to the place where they understand that kindness is a superpower in business?
Well, I think it's a really good question. I mean, our newsletter last month was all around kindness. We are. I think partly kindness is, first of all, getting people to understand having more empathy. So really, if I look at how, I wouldn't say we're necessarily going in there and going, here's how to be more kind. We're just thinking everything we're doing is we're just giving people the tools just to think differently and to think more inclusively, and within that comes kindness. But But I think if you look at the epitome of kindness, I mean, I don't know whether you've seen the film, but for the Fred Rogers documentary, but also the film that's just come out with Tom Hanks. I mean, just watching that film was just like, this man is just the kindest person I've ever met. And I just watched that and just said, if we could all look through the world through that lens, what a better place it would be. So I think over the next 12 months it'll be interesting, because I think kindness is starting to really become a hot topic because people are starting to understand it. I think at the moment we integrate it through everything we do, but I think we'll probably watch this space. We'll probably we probably are we do a number of hacking workshops. So I think we have about 15 hacking workshops now. Our latest one, which we're running the pilot next month, it's called Hacking Allyship. I think this year we'll do one called Hacking Kindness, to really understand what is it, those small things that you can do. And recently it was Random Acts of Kindness Day.
Yes.
And I think it's nice to have that day, but actually, what does Random Acts of Kindness every day look like? Yeah, what does and I think that's, and I would say, but I think I definitely know that my parents brought me up well, just because, if I see someone with, a heavy bag at the bottom of the stairs, I don't even think about it. I really don't. No one can do. I would just ask, can I help you? Can I carry that? Anything. And that's not even. I don't even have to think. That's unconscious. That's unconscious. Yeah, and that's upbringing. And I think my parents did bring me up very well. So I think there's elements of going that's upbringing, but you can also teach yourself to do these things and just do them quite often.
So I'm really minded by that, because I think lots of people, almost at home, they are naturally kind. I just have this belief, optimism, that people are naturally kind. But when they get into the office, something happens.
Well, I think that's so interesting, because I don't think, if I look at my 10 years at Profero, I don't think if you asked anyone that worked with me to describe me, I don't think the word kind would have come up.
Right.
Yeah, I really don't. And I think you're 100% right. I had to, we went, and we've got to remember the context. I was the finance director, for the first 18 months. Then I moved into COO, but I still controlled the finances. And quite simply, when we made our first set of redundancies on the dot-com crash, we decided as a senior manager, the three of us decided that I would be the scapegoat.
The bad cop.
I would be the bad cop. And so all of a sudden, I was getting, people very angry with me. And, I was the one making these decisions. And I chose to do that. And then Daryl and Wayne, who were running the business, were able to kind of stay away from that and actually be the, but that's what we have to do for the business. But, I became a scapegoat. That wasn't fun.
No,
it wasn't fun. And actually, looking back now, I'm sure I have some things that probably triggered me as a result of what happened back there. But we did it we did it because we thought it was the right thing for the business. But we change. We get older. We learn new things. And I think in the work I do around inclusion and diversity, I'm on a journey every day. But the more you hear and the more you understand, and let's be really clear. I talked about privilege before. If you look up privilege in Google and you look at Google Images, you do see someone like me. I've always been in a very privileged position. I'm never going to apologise for that, simply because I wasn't in control of that privilege. But secondly, I know how hard my parents worked to put me through private school. My dad wasn't an immigrant from Italy. He came here at 18 with nothing. And started his off licenses. They worked every hour to put me and my brother through private school. But at the same time, what I would need to apologise for, if I don't recognise that privilege and use that to actually start pulling people forward, that's when it breaks down. I think, again, coming back to that what Taylor talked about, I think the more information you start to get, the more responsibility you have to put on yourself. And I went to the Do Lectures last year, and I think it was Martin Sheen, the actor Martin Sheen. He, the closing of the conference was, understand your influence and then work out what you can do for good using that influence. I thought that was a brilliant, brilliant insight.
Wise words for anybody to think
Yeah,
about. But I think it comes back to you develop an awareness of
you
self,
do develop an awareness.
Right?
Yeah.
And that it probably is a maturity thing, is it?
It is a maturity thing. It's an experience. I think it's a knowledge thing. For a lot of people don't know what they don't know. That's a lot of what we do. I think, if you look at us, it's partly, if you look especially around inclusion and diversity, we do talk about it being a mindset. And I think, you do need to connect with people's hearts. And because of the work that I do, as I get to meet every day people that are excluded every day, both from the workplace and society. And actually, it breaks my heart to even imagine what that must be like. And to be honest with you, I'm experiencing some of that now, tiny, tiny bit, simply because I'm having to go into rooms recognizing that actually I don't know. And sometimes I get worried about what I'm going to speak about. So, and a lot of the time I am in the out-group in a lot of rooms I'm in. So I am starting to feel it and understand a bit better, but I could never understand. I could never fully appreciate to the level because, I've had such a privileged life and I still live in a society that unfortunately is still dominating at what I'd call the power level by white, straight men that look like me.
How can people find out more about what you're doing? Because I appreciate a lot of this work happens, it is at a corporate level, but if people want to just understand more, you mentioned the newsletter, is the book a good way in?
The interesting, so the book is Creative Superpowers. Creative Superpowers is a book really, so we talk about as a business, we equip people for the age of creativity. So we think there are two things. If you look at our business, there are two things that really differentiate us from robots. The first one is creativity. The second one is emotional intelligence. And when I say creativity, I'm talking about creativity with a small c, not a big C. So I am talking about ideas, problem solving, everything that impacts. So the book's called Creative Superpowers, and within that we've got 4 superpowers, which is hacker, maker, teacher, thief. And as we've talked today, I would have talked about all 4 of those things. Yeah, so thief, for example, the fact that we've got a workshop now that is based on something I've developed 14 years ago, but just in a completely different sector. That's just going, okay, what can I use for my past and use it now? And that's thief. I think, the fact that I went to Hyper Island, that was just me being a teacher. Yeah, but also teaching myself in terms of what skills do I need, and actually the key thing for teachers. So that they're skills just for, I think, for business, full stop. I think in terms of what they can sign up to is our newsletter, which is called Towards Utopia. I'll send you the link. If anyone's interested and interested in what I've had to say, link in with me on LinkedIn, and I'll more than happily share some of those resources.
Brilliant. And I'll all of these links will be in the show notes as usual, so everyone can find ways in that way. So Daniele, thank you very much, but I can't let you go until my usual closing question. And it's around kind of your daily routines. We started right at the beginning in terms of you're very aware of where your mojo level is and what you do to dial it up. You talked about exercise, for example. What else are you doing on a daily basis or a routine that you have to do to keep the mojo?
Well, I think the key thing that I changed probably 2 years ago is I used to make that really bad mistake of first reading my emails when you go to the toilet in the morning. Yeah, that was the first
one, yes.
That one,
I recognise that,
and it just because we do so much work in productivity, I spend a lot of time hacking what my daily routine should be and what it shouldn't be, and that was just the worst possible way to start the day. And so today I don't think I checked my emails till 11. Okay, that's partly because I went for a run at 9:30, but I was working before 9:30. But I knew I had two projects that I wanted to deliver. So for me, it's just understanding the negative impact email has on you. We do work flexibly, so that does mean I never work 9 till 6. Most of the time I am working in the evening. I do find evening quite nice because it's quiet. I'm not a morning person, so understanding your natural rhythms.
Yeah.
That's
your
why I think
circadian rhythms.
Yeah, I think having core working hours, I think works. That might be 10 to 3 in a business. But having start times and end times that are the same for everyone just doesn't recognise that we've all got different rhythms.
Mm.
And so for me, I will always make sure I have downtime. So my big passion is films. One of the big projects I do every year with my wife is we watch all of the best movie Oscar-nominated films before the Oscars. That we've done that for the last 5 years.
Great.
We watch them all, every single one. So that, sometimes that does mean the weekend. It does sometimes mean on Saturday night we go and watch 3 movies in one day. Because sometimes they don't come out till the weekend before, but we watch every single one, and then between us we both rate them, and that, now I actually share them.
And do you predict who's going to win?
We don't predict who's going to win. That's not really. We're just saying what our think. Preference is, and obviously we want the first one to win. We want. But it's funny how many people, because I shared it further on social this year, is how many people went on, you predicted the winner, because Parasite was my favourite film.
Right.
And so it was like as if I was, that's my job, was to predict the winner. And, it's 9 films. So everyone's like impressed that I predicted the winner. It just was my favourite film. And, it doesn't always happen. The favourite film comes first. For me, having that ability of downtime, so recognising downtime, having that ability of what we call deep work. So having moments where you're focused on a day to go, okay, I am going to do some real project work, meaningful stuff that I'm going to get out today, and then having meetings and email and all that stuff around that. So actually the focus for me is that meaningful work. Did I even just asking yourself the question every day, what did I do meaningful today? Yeah, what did I do that made a real difference? That might be a proposal that will have, if the client buys it, will have a huge impact on their staff. It might be a blog post or writing something, some thought pieces that will have will have an impact. So everything we talk about is impact. So if you look at Masculinity in the Workplace, which is an event we would do every year on International Men's Day, every year we kind of go, from the start it was, can we get men in the room? Yeah, are men going to come? Yeah. We now last year was, okay, let's take it one step further. So we did a big research piece, which was launched on 19th November. And so the report for that is coming out next week. Okay, so getting that report out, for us, our challenge is, who can we get it out of? How many people can we get to read that report? Because actually there's no point in doing the research unless it creates change. Yeah. So this year, Masculinity, we want to make it bigger. So it's like what? So in the back of my mind the whole time, it's how can we make that bigger to have even more impact? And I think there was a brilliant quote actually, which kind of, I think my heart jumped for joy, as well as kind of slightly went, oh, this puts so much, felt like pressure, but pressure's good. And it just said, Masculinity in the Workplace is the gender equality event that has more white men than anything else in the marketplace. Bravo. Now use it to drive change. Yeah, and so it just not that we didn't, we already had the natural pressure, but it was such an insightful comment, because it basically said, at the moment it's an event we do once a year that does get people to think differently, but what more can we do? Yeah, and so that's really, if I'm, that's where I, so I'd love, love to get to the event, and hopefully you and we met at the event.
We did meet at the event.
You were at the event, so I would love you to come back to me and speak afterwards, and not have to ask me what did you do to drive that change, because we'd be talking about it at the event. What things that we've already done that have made an impact.
Yeah, and that's a good ambition to have for November.
It is.
I'm sure we'll get there. So Daniele, thank you so much for your time today.
A pleasure.
Your trip through, as I said, this prolific career, but the kindness that sits behind it, and the impact and the change that you're making. It's just wonderful to hear. So thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure.
I found that conversation with Daniele just so valuable and incredibly thought-provoking. Certainly thinking about not only your own mojo, but what kindness, or lack of it, means to other people's mojo. So some things I'm going to think about. Thinking about the impact of how you show up, what you say, how you behave. Thinking about how you can show more empathy to other people's situations. Considering what your daily random act of kindness is. And I love that Martin Sheen quote. I'm certainly going to take that one away. Understand your influence and work out what you can do for good with that influence. You can find out more about Daniele via his LinkedIn, and you can sign up for the Utopia newsletter, Towards Utopia, via their website. The book, Creative Superpowers, is a great resource, a series of essays that will inspire you to take a creative angle to whatever challenge that you face. So I really hope you enjoyed the episode. Please do remember to subscribe so you get notifications of future episodes. Please do leave a 5-star rating, and as I say, the Holy Grail, it would be so kind if you could leave that review on Apple Podcasts, because it really does allow more people to discover the Mojo podcast. So until next time, please do stay safe and well, and I hope your mojo continues to flow.